Hello and welcome to the Trevor Roberts Talkfest podcast. Thank you for tuning in with me tonight. Tonight we're going to go back over the third door. We're going to look at step 3 and we're actually going to do part 1. So step 3 is, I think, I want to say 10 chapters long. And the first couple of steps that we did were 3 chapters long each. So this step was massive. I just reviewed everything. I finished reading this probably 3 weeks ago, and then I just went back through and kind of skimmed everything and collected my notes. This is a really exciting piece. We get to learn about his dream mentor for pretty much all of this period. So, Alex Banayan wrote The Third Door. We'll do a quick recap of step 1 and step 2, but brief synopsis of the book is that he's on a wild quest to interview the most successful people in all the different industries that he can think of, everything from film, music, tech, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, investing, Lady Gaga for music, Steven Spielberg, and the list goes on and on. I mean, different people that are successful in different industries. He wants to interview them. He gets into entrepreneurs, authors, um, people that set up conferences and events, and he talks to them about how they got started in their career when they weren't anybody, when they didn't have any connections, when they didn't know what to do, where to get started. How did they learn how to take those first few steps? It's a fascinating book. When he goes on this mission to figure this all out, he's a freshman in college at USC, so he's 18 years old. And one of the first things he does is he goes on The Price is Right and he hacks The Price is Right, figures out how to get on the show, ends up winning, gets all this money, starts his mission. So the book is just exciting and it's full of stories. And along the way on his mission, he ends up meeting a dream mentor. That individual's name is Elliot Bisnow, and Elliot takes him on a whole new journey that we haven't got into at all. We learn a lot about Elliot, how Elliot got started, some of Elliot's connections. Alex learns a ton through Elliot. Elliot kind of becomes a figurehead throughout the rest of the book. And this step that we're going to go over today is going to go into all of that. Now, before we get into that, I do want to do a quick overview of some of the things I want to talk about in the next month, 2 months, just sort of the content that I want to do on the channel. And then we'll do some recaps. So we're going to recap step 1, we'll recap step 2, and then we'll get into step 3, our content for this evening. And I should say this, I say this evening because it's kind of late for me. It's Monday night on April 8th. But I guess what I mean is whenever you end up listening or watching on the YouTube. Now, if you don't know, the main version of this podcast is a podcast. You can find it anywhere you get your podcast, but there is a YouTube. So you can, same name, go to YouTube. You can actually watch the podcast on there. I always enjoy doing the YouTube version personally because I feel like you get a little bit better sense of who the person is and what they're talking about. But, um, for example, the Your Mom and Dad podcast, I listened to that for years and years just on podcasts while driving, and it's always good for driving. But recently I switched over to the YouTube, and now I just can't go back because it's so much fun watching them on the YouTube. So, some of the content that I want to talk about in the next couple of months, I'm going to finish the third door. There's 5 steps in total. I think step 3 is going to be the only one that I break into 2 parts just because it's so big. So then we're going to have step 3, part 2, step 4, and step 5, and that's it. Then we're going to move on to a book that I've got right here. It's called The Go Giver. It's a short book. It's about 100 pages. It's by Bob Berg and John David Mann. A little story about a powerful business idea. So I heard about this book on Instagram. It was from somebody recommending their top 5 books for someone that is interested in starting a business. So I checked it out, read a little bit about it. I'm always intrigued about giving because you always hear those that give end up receiving more, or it's better to give than to receive, and sort of those little cliche things. It ends up talking about those cliches in the book, but there's 5 laws of successful business owners in the book. It's all centered around giving. It addresses the it's better to give than to receive, and the book is fascinating. It's like something you can read in a couple days. It's 100 pages. It's super fast read. I feel like reading it again, and I probably will read it another time, and then I'm going to go through it. So I'm excited to go through that one. The next thing I want to do is um, talk about Dungeons and Dragons. So I have never played Dungeons and Dragons in my life, and it's always been something that I was sort of just like, I can get into almost anything. I can get into fantasy books and fantasy TV shows and science fiction and um like really trendy, popular athletic sporty things, and also really nerdy stuff and really deep philosophical conversations, and just like wondering about something or learning about someone's opinion and taking a really deep look into like one topic, or doing like quick fire topics and just talking through all of that. I don't really mind. I'm interested in almost anything that someone else is interested in. But Dungeons and Dragons has always been a hard pass for me. I just feel like sometimes there's Dungeons and Dragons for me has always been reserved for a really select group of people that were fully invested in it, and it always felt like something that you couldn't just sort of do. Like you had to be all in. Everybody that does Dungeons and Dragons that I know, which isn't that many people, but the ones that I did know, it was like they did it every week, and it was like for hours and hours and hours, like 6 hours at a time or 4 hours at a time. And I don't know like how they were able to shut down their other people in their lives. Like for me, being a dad, being married, like I just don't know how I could be like every Tuesday, for 6 hours, I'm committed to Dungeons and Dragons. And I feel like I always thought that you basically had to commit that amount of time. And if like I don't know if it's the sort of thing where if you don't show up, the campaign and the group of people can really move forward without you, because your character would can't just really disappear, and the other people's storylines are kind of it matters if you're there or not, I think. Now maybe that's not exactly true, but I do watch your mom and dad podcast, and they, for the most part, what they do is they review reality TV. I think they focus on The Bachelor, The Bachelorette, Bachelor in Paradise. I don't know if they did The Golden Bachelor or not. They probably did. And then I think they do some marital conversations. They do Love is Blind. Um, it's a really, I love Jess and her husband Evan. And then previous to that, there was Chatty Broads. My wife was really into that. It's no longer a podcast because it was done with Jess and then Becca, who was a candidate or a previous. Uh, she was previously on The Bachelor, and I don't know if Becca ever went on Bachelor in Paradise or not. But anyway, years later, they started the Chatty Broads podcast, and it became very popular. And it kind of morphed into a couple things. There was Chatty Bros, their husbands got together. I think for whatever reason, they decided to end that. And then Jess and her husband Evan started the Your Mom and Dad podcast. And for a while, I didn't even listen to that because it was kind of like, Jess was always my favorite on Chatty Bronze, and I think Becca's awesome too, but I just always really liked what Jess had to say. And then I always liked what Evan had to say on Chatty Bros. So I probably should have given him a chance. I just didn't for some reason. But then my wife was like, it's really good. You should listen to it. And so I did. And now I follow along and watch all of their content. But then they did an episode like 2 months ago on Dungeons and Dragons, and I was just like, again, I just never have had any interest in it. Probably because I didn't understand it, and because I felt like, for the most part, that you just have to invest too much time. And I was like, I really can't get into this. And like magic and any of those things in that realm, I don't understand any of it. I have no base knowledge of it. And I feel like there's so much lore and there's so many rules and it's so intricate that I didn't know how to get into it. Now I did watch Stranger Things, and I know that Stranger Things has kind of made it trendy or somewhat popular or cool even. And even though it's been talked about in a more of a cool way, and that movie came out with Chris Pine and it's dungeon, and it was actually reviewed, like it was, the critics gave it good ratings, and I think that was sort of unexpected. But I didn't watch the movie, even though it was rated good and even though the actors in it are good. It was Dungeons and Dragons, and I just don't know. Like, I don't know if that's my thing or not, right? Well, your mom and dad podcast, they have their Dungeons and Dragons second episode come out, and this time it has Katie Thurston in it. And Katie Thurston is one of my all-time favorite bachelorettes and just a favorite personality that went on the reality TV. And so I was like, whoa, like this is very surprising that she was on it. And so I think I skipped like my scroll on YouTube. I was like, nah, I'm not going to watch that. But eventually I ran out of like stuff I was into, and I was just bored, and I was like, okay, what am I going to watch? And I decided to click on it. I was like, I'm just going to give this a chance, and instantly hooked. It's awesome. And so, like, I'm learning about it. They're talking about Evan's like coworker and longtime friend has been always been super into it, and Evan was the same way as me. He was like, no, I'm not really into it, and they were still friends and everything, and they talked about other stuff, but they didn't really, like, they knew they weren't going to hang out on Dungeons and Dragons kind of a deal because Evan just wasn't into it. But then Jess really was the one that got into it first and wanted to do an episode about it. So she tells Evan, he talks to his buddy, and the buddy's like, yeah, by the way, I'm a dungeon master, which I guess means that he kind of like develops the storyline and leads the campaign. And then the dungeon master plays the narrator and sort of plays all the random characters that you run into while you're playing. And again, I've never played. I'm still very like learning the lore and the rules and how it all works. So forgive me if I don't know what I'm talking about, but it was so cool. It was like, it just was the perfect scenario because Jess and Evan had never played. Katie Thurston had never played, but she's sort of like, I would say she's, Evan and Jess, they're they have probably the most popular Bachelor recap podcast, but it's not like they were the Bachelor or the Bachelorette. So Katie Thurston's got a little bit more of a following. So they've got her to kind of capture my attention, but I have already been watching Evan and Jess anyway, and they're awesome. And then they bring in their close friend who they have this excellent dynamic with, who's like a pro dungeon master, has been doing it for years. Also, his name's Brian Samus. He's in a band, and he can like speak with multiple voices, and it's clear that I think he was doing some theater and stuff. So he's just an awesome personality. He's used to talking into a microphone and being on podcasts and that sort of stuff. So he just seamlessly comes in. And then they have I believe he does the editing for them, but his name's Lee's in the background on all of the episodes. He kind of plays too. And so because Evan and Jess had never played, and they really set it up where they're telling the audience like, forgive us, we don't know how it works, which is like just like me. And they're like, can you explain the rules? And we learn about the characters that they created. And then we've got the pro dungeon master who just does such a good job of not making you feel like an idiot when you're watching and you don't know what you're doing. And so I just I I found myself obsessed with these two episodes. There's only two episodes. They're like 2 hours long. I've watched them both in the last like 2 days. And then also I've started to go back and rewatch the one with Katie Thurston because it's just so interesting to me. I can't get enough of it. I don't know anybody that's a dungeon master, and I've reached out to a couple people, and no one else wants to play with me. My wife Alex did say she would, but she doesn't know how to play either. So we're kind of like, I don't know. I hope that before I lose interest in this, I can meet somebody and get like a game, going, or maybe I can just join somebody else's game. But it sounds awesome, and I want to play. So I got to figure out how to make this happen. Then I want to cover The Bachelorette. So, Jen's Bachelorette season, I don't know when it's coming out. I think they're filming now. Might be coming out in July, but I'll be covering that. And then I'm going to get back to having guests on the podcast. I've already reached out to a couple people and they both said yes. So now it's just scheduling when to have them come on. My day job does involve a bit of travel, and so my schedule is a little hectic, but as soon as I can find some time and a little bit more of a regular routine, I'm going to get some guests coming back on the podcast. So I'm excited about that. I'm not going to say anything about who they are just yet. We'll wait as we get closer, but look forward to that. And yeah, I think that that's good. So the Third Door content, the Go Giver book content, Dungeons and Dragons, if I can figure out a way, the Bachelorette, and then getting back to some guests. I think that that's enough for now. I'm really excited that I've been doing this a little bit more consistently and finding the time to do it. So yeah, all right. I think that that's enough of an overview, and we can jump back into today's content, which is The Third Door, Step 3, Part 1. All right. So, actually, I am going to do a quick recap. So, Step 1 was called Ditch the Line. Step 2 was Run Down the Alley. So, Step 1, 3 chapters, is Ditch the Line. So, staring at chapter 1 is called Staring at the Ceiling, and this is about taking the time to reflect where I'm at in life and ask if there's somewhere I wanted to be headed. And again, remember, this book is about how successful people got off the ground. And just take everything into context. It can be if you're wanting to start a business, if you're in your career and you're wanting to get promoted, or let's say you're in college and you don't know if you've got the right major, or you don't know what your major is, or maybe you're in an industry and you're not sure if it's the right industry. This book is really about somebody that isn't sure, or I guess somebody that like wants to either start something or make a big change in their life, and how do they do it. You don't have to be an entrepreneur. I mean, the book really focuses on being an entrepreneur and getting something started, but it could be just anything. Like, it's about somebody that wants something more, and it's primarily focused on your career, but it could be, let's say you're a parent and you really want to take being a parent to the next level. There's all kinds of helpful tips and tricks and like life mottos and way to live your life and rules to live by. Excellent stories that might inspire you in this book. So for me, starting a business, building connections, that's kind of like why I was interested in the book and the lens that I look at everything through. So chapter 1 is Staring at the Ceiling, and it's just about taking the time to see where I'm at in life, and am I headed in the right direction? Am I headed in the direction that after I've taken the time to reflect and think about it, and now I know where I want to go, is that the direction I'm headed in? And most likely it's probably not, because you're probably just on autopilot and you're just doing them. Like they say, if you don't, they say that we're doing like 92% of what we did yesterday is what we're going to do today. And 92% of what we did today is what we're going to do tomorrow. And so, in order to deviate from your normal path, it requires quite a bit of intentional energy and effort. So, taking a moment to just pause and ask yourself, where am I actually headed? You're probably not headed to where this like idea in your head is. And then you're probably going to need to change a few things in order to get there. But also accept that you're not going to be able to do it all overnight. Chapter 2 is The Price is Right. The big action here for me was be vulnerable and ask others for their advice. So I'm going to, as I do the quick recap, we're going to do what the chapter was called and then the action item. And where this comes from is every time you read a chapter in a book, I recommend writing down an action that you want to take and then executing on that. Chapter 3 is The Storage Closet. And it's write down the mission. So chapter 2 is The Price is Right, be vulnerable and ask others for their advice. So in this chapter, he's going on The Price is Right, and he's constantly asking others for their advice, and it ends up he learns a lot throughout that process. He also asks a lot of people for their advice and kind of hears the same thing and doesn't always learn something, but he just keeps at it, and eventually he's getting new bits and pieces from different people. Chapter 3, The Storage Closet, is again going back, taking time to reflect. I know where I want to go. I've asked people for advice on how to kind of do some of it. Now, what is the mission? And then writing it down. So the action item here is actually writing out the mission. Once you've got a mission and you've written it down and you can look back and say, here's the mission, that's going to help you achieve the mission. But if you don't even know what the mission is, then you're probably not going to get very far. Okay, sorry. So step 2 is run down the alley. So now we're actually starting to take a little action. We're getting out, being a little brave, trying some new things here. So the Spielberg game is chapter 4. We learn all about Steven Spielberg's story in this chapter. And the main action here from the lesson that we learn from Steven Spielberg's story is find your inside man or find your inside woman. But it's, okay, I don't have access to hear who's the inside person. The book's called The Third Door, and I guess that is like the first door is the front door, and everybody goes through the front door, and so you got to wait in the huge line. The second door is the VIP door, so it's like some people, a very small percentage, maybe 1 or 2%, are just born with the access, and the book is not for them. So you just take them out of it, but it does exist, obviously, and those are sometimes people that you want to meet along the way. And then the third door is, if you work hard enough, you can probably find somebody that can help you skip a couple steps, and then you can go in the side entrance to the club that no one gets to go in unless you have an inside man or woman. Chapter 5 is crouching in the bathroom. So the main lesson that you learn in this chapter is borrowing credibility, and that you learn this through Tim Ferriss's story, but it's called Crouching in the Bathroom because Alex, the author of the book, actually crouched in a bathroom at one of Tim Ferriss's big speeches. And so again, this book is just full of stories. It's all about storytelling and stories. You hear Alex's stories, but then you also hear the story of other people's success and how he met that person and how he got connected to the next person. I mean, there's got to be like 500 stories throughout the book. Chapter 6 is, well, I know what it is, but I think it's Chi is how you pronounce it. It's spelled Qi. I think he goes by Chi Lu. So it's Chi time or key time. And the main action here is find consistent time to work on the mission. So quick recap there is this Chi works at Microsoft, and we learn his whole story about how he became into the United States, became a citizen, ended up working for Microsoft, got rose really high up in the ranks, and he really came from like not being able to speak English, foreign country, no status at all, not even citizenship, no status at all, even in the other country. Um, and the odds of him even getting in the program that he got into so he could get in the United States were really small. And so we learn his story. And one thing that really made it possible for him was how he manipulated time. Well, he didn't really manipulate it, he just never slept. But we learn about his story there. And then the action item for me is just find consistent time to work on the mission. And another thing I've heard through, I can't think of his name right now, but um, I'd love to come back to it. I wish I had. Oh, it's Jesse, like Itzler. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his last name, but he sells a giant year-long calendar. And one of the things he talks about is if you're going to have like a mission or goal for 2024, when are you going to do that? So let's say you're going to learn French in 2024. A lot of people like to say I'm going to learn French. That's like their resolution. But when are you going to do it? And so he says that if you don't actually say on Thursday at 2 every single week, I'm going to do it, I'm going to practice French for an hour and then write it down on the calendar, that eventually like weeks turn into months and time just goes by and you don't actually do the thing you said to yourself when making the resolution that you were going to do. That's not the best example because if you want to learn a language, you got to definitely do it more than once a week. But that's sort of the thing, is you got to find consistent time to work on the mission. So that was my action item there. And then chapter 7, so I guess step 2 had 4 chapters. Chapter 7 is the hidden reservoir. And so here we learn about a boxer and how he's in like the 10th round and he knows he's going to lose and thought he was going to win. He's running out of energy and something just hits him in his mind and he finds this hidden reservoir and he comes out, and he's able to regain like a 10th wind and come back and win the fight. And it was all about just finding that hidden reservoir of energy, essentially. But the message goes bigger than that, because when you're trying to start a business, you're going to be hit with rejection, failure. And are you going to give up when things get tough, or are you going to find that hidden reservoir even when you don't have any guarantees and just keep going? And I can speak to, I mean, whenever you're trying to start something, it's really hard and you don't get a lot of recognition or encouragement in the beginning. And sometimes you feel like you're are you wasting your time? Could the time be used for something else? And what you would really be transferring your time to is either a different, I mean, for me, a different project that I'd be trying to do and could also fail at, or just like pleasure in the moment, like watching TV or eating snacks. And yes, those things are fun. And yes, I like to do those things, but I don't know. I think I'm okay spending the time on these projects for now. So that was a good message that you learned there. Now, step 3. What we are finally going to cover today is Find Your Inside Man, Part 1. So, again, let's go back. There was Steven Spielberg. So, this chapter 4 is the Steven Spielberg game, and that's where we're introduced to the idea of Find Your Inside Man. Steven Spielberg talks about finding his inside man, and then that's the action item of that chapter that I wrote down, is Find Your Inside Man. Step 3 is all about finding your inside man. So we're going to spend a lot of chapters. It's like 10 chapters on finding your inside man. And once you've found that dream mentor, the right one, the perfect one, then you're like, you have to go all in, and you're not going to know. No one's going to tell you who that is. You kind of have to figure it out. But once you do figure it out, you want to go all in on that. So there's 6 chapters we're going to cover today: the Dream Mentor, the rules, adventures only happen to the adventurous, bite off more than you can chew, that's how you do business, and then exponential life. All right. Chapter 8, the Dream Mentor. So the action here, I'll call out in the beginning so you can think about it as we go through it, is identify a list of dream mentors and reach out for a meeting. So the action is, once you have the list, call them and ask them for a meeting. Okay, so the journey to Bill Gates. So where we're at in our story here is Alex gets a call from Stefan Wheats, his inside man at Microsoft, who had managed to get Bill Gates' chief of staff to call Alex. Now, we don't know who the chief of staff is. Alex doesn't say the name to protect them. But the chief of staff calls Alex to let him know that he heard good things from Stefan and Chi Lu, and that was about the mission. So in our last, in chapter 6, Alex was able to get an interview with Chi Lu from Microsoft, who's pretty high up. And Chi Lu, and Stefan, who we learned about earlier in the book, they both meet with the chief of staff for Bill Gates, tell him about Alex and the mission, and the chief of staff calls Alex and actually says, I love what you're doing, but the book doesn't have quite enough yet. You don't have enough momentum. So we can't set up the meeting with Bill Gates just yet, but if you do a couple more things, we will be able to do it. What he wants is he doesn't have a publisher yet, and he hasn't interviewed enough other people yet. So it's kind of like when let's say you're planning a party and you're in college, and the coolest kid in the school, who's a big deal and everyone knows him and is going to be able to bring like all the other cool people, or maybe there's sort of like a mini celebrity somehow in the school, calls you and is like, whoa, like, hey, I heard about the party you're throwing. Sounds awesome, but it's not quite epic enough yet. I need you to ramp it up a couple more levels, and then I need other people to commit to going, and then I will come. And I don't know if that's the best example, but it's also just sort of like, I don't know, back I used to call friends. I used to try to throw parties at my house. This was sort of after college, but I might have been like at the end of my college career, but I lived in a house with some other people, and I used to try to put together like Halloween parties, um, St. Patrick's Day parties, and I try to have like 50 to 100 people come. And there's a lot of planning that goes into that. You have to organize, how everyone's going to get there safely, get home safely, what you're going to offer for people to drink and for food, and is there going to be any games, and are you going to decorate? And there's just a lot that goes into it. And when you're starting to call people and tell them about it, especially if you're organizing it a few days in advance, people always like to say, well, I mean, who else is going? Or, oh, yeah, that sounds fun, but I have a couple other options. It's Halloween after all, so I'm going to be going out to the bars, or I'm going to be going to so and so's party. It's all the way across town. And you're like, that that's not like a for sure thing. Like maybe they would come to your party, but your party isn't quite like hooking them yet. So it just feels like Bill Gates, and again, this is coming from the chief of staff. Bill Gates doesn't even know about this yet, but it feels like they're almost like, hey, we're Bill Gates. And so if you want to get the interview, you got to really do this, this, and this, and this, and then Bill Gates will be in. And if you think about it, Bill Gates can't just be signing up to do any old thing for a book. But if Bill Gates really had committed earlier, would have made things a lot easier down the road for all the other things that he had to do. But he does get his next step. So his next step is he needs to get a publisher because that was one of the things the chief of staff said. And the other thing is he needs to get more interviews, like actually done. So Alex's mind starts thinking about other potential interviewees, and he starts coming up with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton's like coming to his mind for some reason. He's just like kind of like bouncing from names on his list, and he gets stuck on Bill Clinton. He remembers something about Bill Clinton and Richard Branson on a cruise ship, and he remembers that it was set up by a young guy. And he's like, oh, young guy. Like, that sounds like me. That sounds like, how did this young guy set up an interview with Bill Gates? I mean, that sounds like valuable information, right? So he ends up searching on Google for it and finds Elliot Bisnaugh was the man who organized it. Doesn't know anything about this person, hasn't ever heard of him. So he goes down a deep rabbit hole on Elliot Bisnaugh. Finds out that Elliot is an entrepreneur. Now, I don't know if Bisnaugh is how you pronounce his last name, so I'm just going to refer to him as Elliot from now on. So he finds out Elliot is an entrepreneur. His name is tied to several companies, one being Summit Series, which is a conference for entrepreneurs. Elliot likes to say that Summit Series is an unconference conference. So he's trying to stand out as being very not like your nose is stuffed up conference. When it's more about like trying to be casual. He wears a lot of t-shirts and Toms. He's very laid back. He started Summit Series started with 19 people on a ski trip, and it's now 750 attendees, and it's invite only. And he reads an article about how Elliot plans to purchase $40 million worth of a mountain in Utah for his next conference. And he sees pictures of Elliot with famous people on islands, with models on boats. He seems very secretive. He can't really find anything about Elliot. He just sees some things with famous like celebrities and Elliot. And then so he pulls out his journal and he writes Dream Mentors. And then he writes Elliot Bisnaugh. He decides to cold email him. Now, back in the Tim Ferriss chapter, we learn about cold emailing and how to go about doing that. His cold email experience with Tim Ferriss was really, really just hard to listen to because he emails and he's actually getting a hold of Tim's secretary who's telling him no a million times. Here, it seems like the rest of the book, whenever he cold emails someone, it works out really well for him. I doubt it always works out like that, but anyway, so he cold emails Elliot. Elliot replies, and we learn he talks a little bit about how much research goes into it. He doesn't know Elliot's email address, so he's just guessing. He's just like making up a bunch that could be right and sending him off to that. But 24 hours after the night he sends out all the emails, Elliot replies. It's a very small, simple email. It says, "Great email. Are you in LA tomorrow or Thursday?" And Alex looks at his schedule and it says Thursday is his accounting final. And Alex replies, "I am completely free both days," even though he's not. And then Alex hoped he wouldn't reply with Thursday because anyone who misses the final fails. Elliot, of course, replies 8 a.m. Thursday. He also tells him to read When I Stop Talking, You'll Know I'm Dead, which is a book. And so again, let's go back to the action item of that chapter is identify a list of dream mentors and take the time to reach out for a meeting. So for me, this is exciting because I haven't done this, but there are plenty of people that would be a dream for me. So as I'm just thinking about that right now, I don't know, let me think. So Joe Rogan would be a dream. I mean, really, like to be able to pick Joe's brain on what are the next steps for someone like me. Just talk to him about how he got started and all the things that he's done along the way to become who he is. Be amazing to get a chance to do that. there's a lot of other successful podcasters now, and it's becoming more of a popular thing. So there's plenty of people that do it, but um, the the host, I think his name's Robert, and he does In Deep Geek podcast. I've been listening to his podcast very regularly for about 5 years. I guess it's not a podcast; it's a YouTube channel, and it's all focused around Game of Thrones. But I'm not. I'm very into Game of Thrones, so I feel like I could talk to him about that all day long. But I'm really interested in just how he got kind of off the ground. He has about 700 or 800,000 followers on YouTube, and he didn't have any connections. And he admits that he's horrible at technology, which is something that I'm not great at either. So it's sort of just like, I think for people that are especially Gen Z or just a very tech savvy millennial, doing stuff like this is just kind of like, are you going to do it or not? But the tech part of it's no big deal. For someone like me, and I definitely think for Robert, who's got to be older than me, just judging off of he's got a very gray hair. Um, it's like it's a huge struggle to teach yourself how to do anything with technology. And if you don't have the resources as far as friends, you're googling everything, you don't even know where to look, and a lot of things you read are like um, acronyms and terminology that you don't understand, and it's just like it can be a lot. So um, he would be someone that I'd be excited. Your mom and dad, I've gotten really into them, and since I like talking about the reality TV and doing the recaps, they would be somebody that'd be a lot of fun for me. And I could probably spend a ton of time coming up with a huge list of dream mentors, but I think if I could only do one of those people, it'd be Joe Rogan. Um, I don't even know actually. It'd be tough if I could get like on your mom and dad podcast and do a Dungeons and Dragons episode. I might choose that. I don't know. I mean, it's tough. Joe Rogan is kind of like the top of the mountain, but I feel like would it? No, I think I'd have to go with Joe. I'd have to go with Joe if I could, if it was only one or the other. But it'd be awesome to be on your mom and dad podcast too. All right, let's go to chapter 9, the rules. So the action item here is act like you belong. That's sort of the message I took from it. This chapter has a ton of awesome tips and tricks. I just like to pick one. I feel like if you're not going to take 7 actions from reading a chapter. You're just not. I mean, this book has I'm just guessing like 25 to 30 chapters. So, if I take 30 actions from reading this book, that'd be phenomenal. I'm not going to do that. I mean, if you can take one action from a chapter, that's amazing. But again, if there's 30 chapters, you have to take 30 actions, and I'm not going to do that. So sometimes you just have to pick one and try to go with it and try to really reinforce it in your mind. And I think acting like I belong is the one that stuck out to me the most here. But this chapter is full of really cool tidbits. So, uh, Alex again, he's reached out to Elliot. Amazingly, Elliot replies and says, "Yeah, let's set up a meeting." And I kind of just brushed over that in the last chapter, but Alex writes him a cold email and he puts the email in the book. So you get to read the whole thing. I think in today's day and age, I mean, I don't know, the book was written in 2019, so it's not that old, but the email to me is a little wordy. Like, I don't know that I'm surprised Elliot actually read it because it's got a lot of words in it. It doesn't really capture my attention, but at the same time, it is really heartfelt. So if you did actually read it, it probably would stick with you because the message is really good. But I don't feel like it has a big hook, and it's very wordy. Elliot replies with like 5 words and no, like, so I don't know. Again, I think he got a little lucky that he replied, but um I mean, this guy, Elliot, is like setting up interviews with business owners like crazy, and he ends up agreeing to meet with Alex. And I think it was just something about Alex's being so genuine, and he does tell him a little bit about the mission. Um, and I think it just really spoke to Elliot, and he felt like he probably had seen something of himself in Alex, and so he agreed to take the meeting. Now, before the meeting, Alex looked at pictures of Elliot and looked at how he dressed. He intentionally dressed like Elliot for the meeting, and it worked. So the message here is just prepare for meetings. Whenever you're meeting with someone, like if you're doing an interview, or I mean, it could be an interview for a job, or it could be like meeting a new colleague or meeting somebody that you know could end up being a mentor, or um, anytime in life when something matters and you're meeting someone, just prepare for the meeting. Elliot has been ignoring him. So they end up going to the meeting, and Elliot ignores him for a while in the beginning. And then Elliot finally blurts out, "Did you read any of that book I told you to read?" And Alex replied that he read the entire book, and it's only been like 2 days. So Elliot puts down his phone and starts paying attention. And here the message for me is just whatever it takes. Um, Elliot became intrigued with Alex and wanted to continue their conversation. But from Alex's point of view, it was only supposed to be scheduled for 30 minutes, and remember, he's got that final. Now they are in LA, and that's where he goes to school, but um, he doesn't exactly have like time. Well, he's probably got like 30 minutes, and then he's got to get back to class. Um, but the whatever it takes is sort of like, yes, he's in college, but the mission has become everything to him. I mean, he's trying to write a book and get it published, and to him, this is more important than going to college. And if you even go back to the beginning of the book, it talks about how he was in med school and didn't really want to be in med school, and what did he want to do with his life. And that was how he got onto this. So he's in college, but he doesn't really want the end game there. He just feels like he has to go to college. So Elliot ends up saying, "Hey, if you know, I'm really enjoying talking to you. If you want to join me, and I've got a bunch of meetings I'm about to do. If you want to sit in on them, you can. But I've got some ground rules." And so he gives him 5 rules. Act like you belong is rule number 2, and that's the one that I'm kind of taking as my big takeaway. But rule number 1 is never use your phone in a meeting. He says use a pen and paper for notes, and that it just never looks good to use your phone. And I agree. I think that's a good rule. Act like you belong. Don't gawk over celebrities. Fans ask for pictures, and peers shake hands. I don't know if I agree with this 100%, because the genuine, true Trevor does gawk over celebrities and definitely would want to take a picture. And I think that the being genuine to yourself is, you always hear that too, right? But at the same time, acting like you've been there before, acting like you belong, can really help you and goes a long way when developing relationships. And it's, um, I don't know, sometimes you just need to act like you've been there before. And I always forget that. And so I think allowing myself to be the true me and I feel like I'm good at building those relationships. And a lot of that's because I'm very genuine. Where I could, improve is just um, acting like I've been there before when I haven't. Sometimes when I'm doing something that's new for the first time, it gets so exciting to me. And I definitely leave off that impression. Like everyone knows when I haven't done it before. Rule number 3 is mystery makes history. I definitely don't love this one. Elliot really seems to believe in always being a big mystery, and that's not me. Rule number 4 is if you break my trust, you're finished. If you act like a vault, people will treat you like a vault. I think that's a great one. Obviously, you don't ever want to break anyone's trust. and just being a vault. Like if people share a secret with you, then don't tell anybody about it. And I completely agree with that. And then rule number 5 is the most awesome. And the only reason I didn't choose it as my overall takeaway is because it's the name of the next chapter, and the next chapter is all about it. But it's adventures only happen to the adventurous, which I absolutely love that message. Then leave them wanting more. So that's not a rule, but that's kind of the next theme of this chapter. Elliot's meeting style. So Elliot takes Alex along as he's meeting with these business owners, and he's actually talking, he's just doing interviews and getting to know them. And his meeting style is very much about the guest. He doesn't offer much about himself, and at the end, he offers a little bit about himself, and then he always leaves them wanting more. They end up having lunch with the founders of an entrepreneur organization and then the founder of Groupon, which is so cool. Alex ends up telling Elliot about the Price is Right story when the two owners leave the table for a bit. And Elliot is completely blown away. And he's like, how have you not told me about this yet? And again, they've only been met for 4 hours. So he's telling him pretty quickly. But Elliot had Alex tell the co-founder of Groupon about it. He was amazed and really leaned in and wanted to hear about it. And so the message here is the $1 million story and its power. And I think, I mean, that's a really big action item too, is we all need to have our $1 million story. What is the story of the business? How did it get started? I think having that story can really captivate people. It seems to be in all of Elliot through like the rest of the book. Whenever he's interviewing somebody to Alex, he has Alex tell that story, and it really helps break the ice and get the relationship off to a quick start with the person Alex is meeting. And then at the end of the chapter, Elliot pushes Alex to go and interview Larry Page, the founder of Google, the CEO of Google, I should say. And Alex kind of botches it. He goes up and says hi, but he isn't able to ask for the interview. He's not acting like he's been there before, and he just kind of messes it up. So Elliot says, you got a lot to learn. The next chapter is Adventures Only Happen to the Adventurous, and I wrote down for an action, be open with opportunity when opportunity presents itself. So say yes to adventure. In this chapter, Alex is back at home and he's thinking about the mission. He researches and learns before he can get a publishing deal, he needs a literary agent. So, you know, you have to keep in mind he's met Elliot. He's learned a lot. He's excited that he met Elliot, but he's back and he's thinking about the mission. And his next step is he needs to get an agent. So he actually goes out and buys about a dozen books about the process of getting an agent, and he starts slowly pouring through them. And while doing that, he starts using the Tim Ferriss email approach, and he's just emailing dozens of best-selling authors for advice. And he's just making up their email addresses or Googling them, and he's just cold emailing them, asking them for advice. And the advice just starts pouring in. It actually works. So some of the action items that he learns are start. Oh no, this is action items I wrote down for myself. Start cold emailing podcast hosts for advice. And one piece of advice was looking at the acknowledgement section of books to find agents. He ends up making a list of 20 agents and he writes down no agent, no Bill Gates. So now that he's kind of like taken this next step of like learning that he needs to get an agent and buying the books and going through the books, and he's got this idea in his head, he heads over to Elliot's house to discuss the updated info. And Elliot is with his brother, and they say, we're flying to Europe tonight. And Alex is like, sweet, like, where? And the brothers are like, we don't know. We just decided right now. And then they ask him if he's in. And Alex starts thinking about how crazy that is. And he's like coming up with all these excuses. He's like, I can't afford it. I can't go when it's not planned. My parents won't let me go. What if something bad happens? I just don't know where I'm going in Europe, and they're flying out like in an hour. So they're inviting Alex to come, but they're saying, just come tomorrow. And he's like, well, how would I even meet up with you guys, right? But eventually he decides to go. And then he has to tell his mom, and his mom says no. And then his mom kind of hits him with the same questions. And eventually his family's like fighting and crying, and they think something bad's happening to him. Um, but eventually he's able to convince his mom that he can go. So um, no, actually, the grandma comes over to the house and like helps get him convinced. But I guess the chapter here is adventure only happens to the adventurous, and so a couple things. I mean, like I said, this chapter has a lot of little tips and tricks as well. Say yes to adventure. There's been a couple times in my life where, I mean, probably more so when I was younger, but you just something kind of happens and you're presented with an idea and you just say yes, and it turns out to be an amazing experience. And the relationships with people really strengthen in these moments. So we learn more as we read through the book. Like, Elliot really didn't expect him to say yes. He just kind of invited him to see what he would say. And then later we learn how just like this step of Alex, by taking the leap of faith and going to Europe and making it happen, really made Elliot think like, okay, Alex could be like me. Like, he could be someone that I do want in my life. And I think Elliot just as much is intrigued by having this mentee. And that's something I think we don't always think about is our mentors, they want to have someone they're mentoring, but they want to make sure it's worthwhile, and is this the right person? I mean, the mentor is getting something out of it, but it's got to be a fit for them too. And he's testing Alex a little bit here. That Alex, of course, goes to Europe, and um, then we learn more about that in a minute. Now, the next chapter is chapter 11, Bite Off More Than You Can Chew. You'll never be ready for it. Just do it. I love this. This one has really stuck with me. I've heard people say this on Instagram. Watched a lot of reels about it. But um, I firmly believe in this, that I've heard Mr. Beast talk about this when it comes to YouTube channels. You're never going to research it to death and learn the perfect way to execute it. The best way to execute it is to do it and fail and do it again and fail, and then eventually just improve one thing at a time, and you'll get better and better and better. And biting off more than you can chew is a message about just sign up for stuff that you're not ready to do yet. A good example for me, um, in my personal life, is whenever I did my first speech or talk at a conference. I wasn't necessarily ready. I just agreed to do it. I raised my hand, and I remember the very first time I did it, I had just got back from leave. I was basically brand new into the job, and I like said, "Yeah, somebody gets to go up and talk in front of thousands of people for 5 minutes," and I was like, "Yeah, I can do it." And it's sort of that like beginner's courage, and you just agree to do it. You don't even know what you're agreeing to, and then you get up there and you do it. And um, everybody that knew me knew how nervous I was, but a lot of the audience members didn't. And then after I went up there and talked, people were just coming up to you like crazy, and it's so wild. Like, I think that sometimes when we're in that moment, we're inspiring people and we didn't even know it. And then later, when we're in the audience, we see people up on stage talking, they're inspiring us. And so I think a lot of people that are out there inspiring us have probably bitten off more than they can chew as well. And we just don't know it. I mean, when you're the one watching, you don't know that that's a lot for them either. So Elliot didn't know, and we go back to the book here. So Elliot didn't know what one was, but he went into his friend's. Oh, okay. So sorry, I was getting ahead of myself, but we learn a little bit about Elliot Bisnow here in this chapter, and we learn how he became an entrepreneur. So he didn't even know what an entrepreneur was when he went to college. And he goes in to see his buddy, and he opens the dorm room, and he's making t-shirts. And his friends, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I'm making t-shirts." And he's like, "Okay, for who?" He's like, "For nobody, for me." He's like, "What do you mean? Who do you work for?" And he's like, "I don't work for anybody. I'm doing this myself." He's like, "Who are you selling them to?" "Anybody that wants to buy a t-shirt." And so Elliot, this concept of like just owning your own business and nobody's telling you what to do, and you have to make it up as you go, and you get to keep the money and you get to set the hours. He's like, "Wow, this seems like a good idea." And so they start selling t-shirts together. Now, that doesn't actually work, and they have to end up quitting that. And then later that summer, after the first year of college, Elliot goes back home, and he's back at home living there. And his dad started a newsletter. It was an online newsletter. And this is, I think, 2006 or 7. So you can go back and think about how, like, those were back then. And Elliot asks his dad if he can sell ad space for it. His dad says no, but eventually says yes. And so Elliot starts calling real estate companies and asking if they want to put an ad in there. He gets a ton of no's. So he's getting rejected all the time. But he starts asking questions like, well, he'll call a business and say, "Who buys your ads?" And then they say, "The marketing director." So then the next business he calls, he's like, "I need to talk to the marketing director." And then he just, like, it's that sort of thing where he kind of writes down, like, how do you do it? And he starts learning that, okay, anytime he can, he's going to ask somebody, "Well, if you were to say yes, how would you want to be approached with your ad, and how much would you want to pay for that?" And he just starts finding out, like, he's literally making this up. He doesn't know anything about selling ad space. He just wanted to do it. And that's sort of the biting off more than you can chew thing. Eventually, he ends up getting a meeting. And so once he gets a meeting, he reads something about how you should have 3 offerings, and they'll most likely choose the one in the middle. So he makes up a bronze, silver, and gold package. He prices on, like, very, like, 4,000, 6,000, 9,000, and they end up taking the silver one in the middle for $6,000. And so he sells his first ad space, and he just totally made up those numbers. And he goes back and tells his dad, and he gets to keep some of the money for commission. And all of a sudden, this is kind of born. So then he ends up going and just selling ad space like crazy the next year in college. And he gets so good at it that he sells $30,000 worth of ad space in a semester. And he's making a lot of money for himself, and he decides to drop out of college. And so um, it's sort of crazy how he learned cold calling, he learned how to sell ad space. And it's such a very, it's not being an entrepreneur really yet. I mean, you're just selling, really. And his dad's the one that started the business. He's only focused on selling. But he learned an extremely cool skill about getting sponsorship money or asking somebody for money. Um, I mean, sort of sponsoring. It's not really sponsoring, but it's sort of like that type of a reach out. You're really selling ad space, but um, it's for a newspaper, and it's similar. So he ends up making friends with some entrepreneurs, and he decides that he wants to learn as much as he can from them. And so the next thing he does is he's like, "Okay, how am I going to set up a thing where we all hang out, and you know, we're trapped for like a week, and I can just learn from them?" So he decides to plan a ski trip, and he gets 19 entrepreneurs to go. And um, how's he going to get them to go? Well, he says that he's just going to pay for it all. So he's like offering their flights to be reimbursed and their hotels to be reimbursed. And then while they're there, there's going to be food, and he must pay for like the ski trip. I mean, I don't really know. He doesn't go into a ton of detail about every single thing that was comped for these people, but it was a week long ski trip and he spent $30,000 on it. And he ends up putting all of that on his credit card, even though he didn't know if he was going to get. I mean, no one's paying him for this stuff. So like, he doesn't know. He doesn't have a magical job that he's getting an extra $30,000 to cover this. He just believes that he's going to be able to sell enough ad space to make up for it, like within a relatively short period of time. And so he does this. He And then he calls his mom. He's like, I need your help booking the hotel, and I need your help renting cars for these people, and what type of food should I serve them? But he really just came up with the idea and then just did it. And when I say just did it, I don't mean like he just made stuff happen. I mean, like, think about how big of a bite that was and how it was more than he could chew. Like, he didn't have $30,000 to do it. And he almost promised people something that I think that he knew he was going to be able to cover it because he got the credit card and he covered it. And it sounds like, just from reading the book, that his dad probably has a decent amount of money. I mean, I don't have a $30,000 credit limit. I don't know how you get that. So where did he get $30,000 to just put on a credit card? I don't know how you do that. But um, could I put I mean, not 30,000, but I could probably get a decent amount going. And so, yeah, I could probably do some of that. Maybe his parents helped him. Not sure. But um, I guess where I'm going with it is he really probably oversold an experience. Like, hey, this is going to be, I think he called it Summit. We're going to get a bunch of entrepreneurs together and just hang out and idea share. But he probably sold it to be a little bit more than it was, when really it was just like him throwing it together last minute. And I love that. It's like, it's not the deceiving part. I wouldn't want to deceive anyone, but it's like, sometimes in order to get, it's like we were talking about that party scenario back in Halloween. You can't really commit somebody's going, but you can say things like, yeah, I've had a lot of people um, tell me they think they'll be able to make it, and here's what I'm planning to have to drink, here's what I'm planning to have to eat, here's the decorations, here's some of the activities, here are the people that have already committed, and I've got a ton of people that are like a maybe. But, if you do commit to coming, that'll certainly help. I'll call back the people that are maybes. I'll get them to commit, etc. So you can kind of, if you have good selling skills, you can spin things in a way that are true, but that help you. Right. So the next chapter is called That's How You Do Business. And it's just about being yourself. It's a very short chapter, it's about a page and a half. Elliot's been telling Alex about the Price is Right story. Elliot's been making Alex share the Price is Right story with all these people he's introducing him to. And Elliot tells Alex that he didn't always know how to tell stories or how to handle himself in business. He showed up in a suit and tie one time, and the guy tells him to take the jacket off and sit at the bar. They ordered cheesy fries. Most of the meeting was relationship building. They discussed business in the middle, and then they got back to hanging out, and it's all about the relationship. That's literally the whole chapter. It's like a page and a half. And the message here is just be yourself. And you can see this is reflected in, like, when Elliot first meets Alex, he's wearing a t-shirt, he's wearing Tom's, he's kind of just like on his phone. He goes into all these meetings with the CEO of all these big deal corporations, and he's always wearing a t-shirt. And then you see him online and he's traveling around and he's always in a t-shirt. And really, he talks about how he wasn't the coolest kid in school, and he didn't have a girlfriend, and he didn't have a lot of friends at all, and he dropped out of high school and joined a tennis program instead and graduated from that. And so he's just a little different. not the most social guy, but he ends up just being himself. And that's the person that everyone's excited to know about. So I think that that is a message we've all heard time and time again. But it's a good one to remember here when you're trying to build relationships and get those connections. All right, chapter 13, it's the last chapter we're going to talk about today, is Exponential Life. So the message here is take calculated risks and invest in yourself. And so Elliot's going to tell Alex a story that he calls the Hamptons story. So there was a tennis program in the Hamptons that Elliot wanted to participate in. It was 3 days and it required a $4,000 donation. So it's a donation. You just basically throwing away $4,000, and he didn't exactly have an extra $4,000. But he did know a very wealthy individual that would be flying there in a private jet that said he could come with. And so he decides that he's going to go on the private plane. He knows this person, so he's got the connection, got the inside person. He does have to give up the $4,000, but he's going to be there around a lot of other wealthy people, and it's for 3 days. And the $4,000 is like getting you a place to stay too. So he says, yeah, and he goes for it. And then over the course of the 3-day tournament, and he's good at tennis, so it kind of works there, he kept meeting all these high net worth individuals, and they all asked him, what are you doing over the next week? And he says, I'm going to the Hamptons. And he knew, he was hoping that one of them would also be going to the Hamptons and would offer to let him stay at his place. And he probably said something like, yeah, I'm going to the Hamptons. I don't really have a place to stay yet, or I haven't figured out where I'm staying yet. And somebody offered that to him, and he ends up accepting and staying at this guy's place. And he says one guy loaned him his Aston Martin, and multiple people let him crash on the couch. And he's like, he says it turned into 3 weeks of him just staying in people's mansions and driving around these rich cars. And he said at this event, he ended up getting new sponsors for Summit 2.0, and one of them was Goldman Sachs. And once he got Goldman Sachs, he was able to put their logo whenever he was reaching out on the sponsorship page and saying like, hey, we've already got them to sponsor. Do you want to sponsor? And so he's borrowing the credibility of Goldman Sachs, which was the takeaway from the Tim Ferriss chapter. So Elliot, he ends up meeting someone from the Obama administration that was tasked with setting up an event for young entrepreneurs. And that someone liked Alex, or liked Elliot, I mean, and asked and assigned him to plan this event. It was very last minute and it needed to be epic. And the guy told Elliot to just tell people when the White House calls, you answer. And so the message here is like, he takes this calculated risk and invests in himself. He doesn't really have the money to do it. It's $4,000. But the investment is the people that are going to be at this thing are kind of like out of reach, really high net worth, wealthy individuals that you just don't get an opportunity to be around. And so he decides to go for it, but he comes up with a plan. He needs to make it turn into something even bigger by sticking around. And so how's he going to do that? Well, he's got to find a way to crash on somebody's couch that he's never met before with his personality. And he's able to do that. And then he's able to develop relationships out of the deal. And those relationships turn into sponsorships, turn into new relationships, turn into the White House asking him to plan an event. And I mean, after this, it's like he plans an event for the White House, and his credibility is just going through the roof. And he's meeting presidents and crazy celebrities. So in this chapter, Elliot talks a little bit about a linear life, which is like college, internship, job, promotion, retire. It's very slow and predictable. It's very much how I've lived my life. And then he talks about the exponential life. And he's saying how successful people like to do the exponential life if they can. And it's where you get to skip a bunch of steps and you seize opportunities whenever you can. and how it's really all about through these connections that you're able to do it. Um, okay, I think that that's enough for today. We went through 6 chapters. So it was quite a bit of information there. Really exciting meeting Elliot. The book really sucks you in as you go through that. And again, the storytelling is awesome. I think that's all I'm going to cover for today. Thank you again. Stay tuned very soon for step 3, Find Your Inside Man Part 2. And I appreciate it. Thanks. Bye.